Thank you. Welcome all to the Western Ross Strathpeffer and Lochalsh Area Committee meeting. Please note this is a formal public Highland Council meeting and it's being recorded, be uploaded for public access via the Highland Council's YouTube site. So we are reminded not to make specific references to individuals or to disclose information which might be in the public domain. And also members reminded that the chat function is to be only used for motions and amendments. And members should use the hand function when wishing to speak. And I apologise in advance if I'm looking to the right because I have all my papers and the agenda on the other screen. Just give me a second. So do we have one apology for absence. That is Councillor Burt has given his apologies. Yes. I don't think do we have any declarations of interest recorded?
I didn't receive any, Chair.
No. Okay. So in that case, we'll go on to item 3 and hand over to John Douglas, who is the fire station commander, for his report. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to come and speak today. I'm just going to go over current figures for quarters 1 and 2 of the 2025-26 previous years, and on behalf of the SFRS and our LSO for the area. So I'll just start on the committee area report which we submitted down at 4.5, the performance report. Basically what we've had is there have been 4 accidental dwelling fires, ADFs, which is below the 3-year average. The majority are classed as low severity, requiring little or no intervention from the service and minimal fire damage within these premises. There were 0 ADF fatalities and 0 casualties, and all ADFs are offered home fire safety visits and agency referrals where required. There were 2 deliberate fires, both of which were deliberate secondary fires, which again is below the average. Referrals are made to other agencies for those at work within our communities. There were 2 non-domestic building fires, which is below our 3-year average, and we attended 11 road traffic collisions. There was 1 road traffic collision related injury who was treated at scene. Our prevention teams are working with our partner agencies throughout the Highland Road Safety Group, including older driver virtual reality schemes and road safety scheme for new drivers. We have attended 17 unwanted fire alarm signals UFAS, and this is again below the 3-year average. From July 23, we have stopped attending AFA call-outs to commercial businesses and workplace premises, such as factories, offices, shops and leisure facilities, unless a fire has been confirmed. Our control room operators now ask anyone who reports a fire alarm to check whether there is an actual fire or signs of fire before sending the nearest fire appliance. This does not apply to sleeping premises such as hospitals, care homes, hotels or domestic dwellings, who will receive our full PDA. This change follows the SFRS public consultations in 2021. Our community safety advocates and station personnel undertook 37 home fire safety visits, and the majority of these targeted the most at risk within our communities. It's been quite, it's not a great deal on that report there, but the good thing is that our prevention team and our operations team are doing very good work in the area at the moment, working around all different people within. And that ends that report. Does anyone have any supplementary questions at all on the back of that?
Any questions?
Oh, I'm liking it today. Lovely Monday morning.
I've got one for you.
Oh, sure.
I'm actually looking at the station availability and establishment, and I'm just wondering, I know that you were trying to recruit retained personnel. I just wondered if it looks actually quite positive from the numbers on the chart there. I just wondered how that was going.
It's going really well actually on the recruitment. Our crews on the stations, along at the stations, are really putting a good effort in. And obviously during the summer months there with the fetes and things like this, where we were going out to different fates and speaking to the public and things like this, we've now managed to bring the staffing levels up quite a lot. One of the ones which we have been having a problem, we've got Lochinver, they're back on the run come December time. I've also implemented a joint mobilising between Torridon and Kinlochhew. So Kinlochhew, we are short on Kinlochhew. You can see they were sitting on 3, and that's lack of drivers. So that's the only thing there. So we're trying to get drivers to go through this, which will then increase us on getting that appliance out the run. But again, due to, as you well know, the issues with the short-term lets aspect of things there, we're struggling to recruit in Kinlochhew for staff members. So that's why we're sitting down at 4, which kicks that down. But what we have done, or what I've went and done, is I've arranged a joint mobilising policy between Torridon and Kinlochhew. So we've got Kinlochhew going over to Torridon to supplement that appliance there, which then is going to bring that on more often than what it has been in the past anyway. So we're doing that. The other stations that we've got, we have brought in quite a lot. We've got 3 extra in at Lochlarn, which has just started. I'm not sure if that's in that total or not. I can't quite recall on that one. And we've got another couple there into Glenelg, which have started, and Kyle is up and down as usual. So yeah, Applecross has also got a new start there also. So no, we're doing really well on the work there, and the crews on the ground are doing exceptional.
That's really positive. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Councillor Campbell? You're on mute.
So you mentioned doing courses, driving courses for older and younger drivers. Where are those courses held?
They're held at various stations. I will get back to you. I could reply to you on that one. I could speak to my community safety department and find out where they are being held. I know there was one over in Inverness recently, and I'm sure they had one down at Kyle as well, but I would need to double check on the figures for that one and let you know, Councillor.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thanks. Well, if I can just say that is really positive, and yeah, the work you do is pretty amazing, and it's so good to see that you are getting staffing in the more rural locations. And I mean, any incident is one too many, I suppose, but it is good to see that the stats are kind of below the average. That is encouraging.
No, it definitely is, and I started post in February here, so that's one of my big drives, was to actually make sure that our staffing levels were increased, and we are. Obviously, any domestic dwelling or any incident that we do we do post domestic incident response, which is another. It's our way of getting our foot into the door off the premises, just to see if they need any fire safety advice and guidance. So that's one way in which we're actually trying to get into people's houses as well. And again, what we're needing is partner agencies to join us and actually start referring homeowners to us, sort of thing, so we can get inside the door through referrals also, if that's one thing that we can achieve. But that's what our community safety team are working hard on, working with our partner agencies to remind them and encourage them to actually get them sent over our way. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
That's lovely.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? In that case, we are just been invited to scrutinise the report, which I think we've done. Thank you.
That's excellent.
Thanks
Thank you
for your
very
time,
much.
Douglas. Okay,
No
thanks.
problem. Thank you.
So our next item is, I think we've got Margaret Ross, who is, get your title correct, Margaret, if you're ready to come in, Assistant Housing Manager, is that right?
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
So we're going to get the Housing Performance Report from Margaret.
Thank you. Morning, members. I'm pleased to present to you today the Housing Performance Report for the period 1st of April to the 30th of September. As you know, this report provides key performance information which is largely based on the reporting framework recommended by the Scottish Housing Regulator, with the exception of the data on homelessness, which are agreed indicators for reporting to local committees. And I hope that you find this data interesting and useful. If I may, I'd like to draw your attention to some key parts of the report. Section 6 covers all aspects of our performance and rent arrears. Although Q2 is slightly up and Q1 performance remains strong. The arrears across this area constitute 3.82% of annual rent due, and that figure is substantially less than the Highland-wide figure of 6.37%. We can see that the majority of the arrears are less than £500. Although from the beginning of Q1 the team served 13 notice of proceedings, that actually resulted in only one court action being initiated, leading to an eviction. And I think that clearly demonstrates the commitment of the team to sustain tenancies and signpost vulnerable households to appropriate support. Section 7 relates to antisocial behaviour complaints. Thankfully, across this area, the level of complaints is generally low. We've currently only got 4 open cases. And some of the cases that remain open for some time, they're more complex, and some of them require multi-agency intervention, which takes time. Section 8 of the report gives us some data around homelessness. By the end of Q2, we had received 9 homeless presentations, and you'll be able to see from the graph at 8.4 that the number of presentations is steady. Table 8 shows us that the majority of people presenting homeless across this area have a 1-bed need. And lastly, in the report, we look at some data around allocations, and we can see that since Q1, we've allocated 12 properties, of which 8 have been tenanted by homeless households, and that is the households in the greatest housing need. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Sorry, I was just moving my mouse to my mic. Any questions, members? Councillor Campbell? Oh, you're on mute again.
When a tenant is evicted, does housing rehouse them?
On the circumstances, they are offered a housing options interview and can present as homeless if they want to.
And if they present as homeless again, the house then?
Perhaps. It depends on the circumstances. Sometimes you get to the absolute point of crisis, such as an eviction, before you get real engagement. So I think the important thing to note is that our door's always open. We're not in the business of putting people out of houses. We're in the business of keeping people in houses. That underpins everything we do.
So you help them get help if
absolutely.
Where appropriate.
We do indeed.
Yeah.
So I've got just a curious question. It's really good to see that our rent arrears are significantly below the Highland average. Do you know why? Have you got any idea why that is?
You've got an excellent team. We work hard. We work hard. You know, it's we don't want these arrears going too high. It gets more difficult the higher they are. So it's all about tenancy sustainment. It's all about looking to see how we can support people that are maybe struggling. And that underpins everything we do.
Okay, Councillor Campbell?
When tenants complain about the heating, that they can't afford heating systems in the houses, are we limited to the amount we've got to try to help them?
It is an issue, it has to be said. We have no control over energy tariffs, you'll appreciate that well. So we can signpost to energy advice organisations. We can ask the maintenance officer to visit to make sure that the system's working properly. We can do referrals to CAB for debt advice. So yeah, there is lots we can do, but the fuel costs remain high in Highland, and you'll know that.
And for the property we have in our ward, council property in our ward, is there enough money? Is there enough money in the budget to upgrade properties which are in a very poor condition?
Well, I would have preferred if somebody from that side of the business was here to answer that question. But there are lots of heating changes happening, I can tell you that.
Oh well.
But maybe I'll ask the service lead for that side of the business to give you a wee email. How would that do?
That's fine. That's fine, thank you. That's fine, thank you.
I've got another question about allocation, and I'm just wondering how much do you work with other authorities right across the UK? If people want to move from here to a different authority and are looking at social housing, do you have a kind of national network, or would they just refer into that authority and start from scratch?
We don't have a national network, would be the simple answer to your question.
Yeah.
But this offering advice and assistance, that's across all areas of our business. So, you know, if we can point them in the right direction, we will, but there is no national network.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I just want to thank Margaret and our team again. I think it's housing is, in my experience, it's the #1 need in the area, and you do a fantastic job. And you are, you're a holistic service, which is really good, you know, working with the whole family and the whole situation. So really appreciate it. And I know that we bombard you all the time with emails and requests, but you're very good and you get back to us, and we really appreciate it. So we're just invited to note Margaret's report. Are we happy to note that, members?
Noted.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Margaret.
That's lovely. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
I see that Mark is in the meeting. So Mark's going to give us an update on the latest applications for the Community Regeneration fund assessment. So we will, so the ones that have been assessed for the fund. So we'll hand over to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So ahead of today's meeting, you'll have received the committee report together with the application forms and a summary spreadsheet, which highlight the RAG assessment of each of those applications. It's worth noting that the assessments that we undertake are undertaken solely on the applications and the content in the application itself during that application process. So what I'll do is I'll just go through very briefly each of the 5 projects, if that's okay, and summarise them. And then if members have any questions on those at the end, I'll take questions at the end. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yep.
Excellent. So we've got 5 applications to consider. Firstly, Wester Ross Radio, who are seeking £30,000 towards a project to completely overhaul their studio equipment at both Gairloch and Ullapool. The total project cost is just over £55,000, and the organisation has fundraised to secure the balance required to undertake the project. There's extensive support for the project demonstrated with the application, and it not only serves to continue local station broadcasting, but also offer some skills development opportunities for young people in the area. Next, we've got an application from Highland and Lochalsh Community Trust, who are seeking £68,839 to replace the roof on the public convenience in Kyle, and to provide a safe and secure to operate roller shutter door, which will replace the existing clunky sliding concertina door. Last year, members may be aware the roof leaked and it caused significant internal damage to the toilets. And the Trust have now developed a phased plan to refurbish and modernise the toilets and make them more sustainable to operate. And they've developed, with the assistance of Hyde, they've developed a business plan to ensure that. This phase of work will also see new payment barriers installed to stop people dodging payment, and that'll be funded via another provider. Next, we've got an application for £40,000, which is 23% of the total costs from West Fund. Scottish Land Fund are majority funding this project, and the purchase of the land is looking to enable an affordable housing scheme, an emergency medevac helipad, some community woodland, and a camper van air, which will fit in with some needs on the NC 500. This project meets a number of priorities identified within the area place plan, which I've listed on that summary spreadsheet. Next, we've an application from Applecross Community Company, who are looking at just short of £18,000 to fund 4 surveys which are required to complete their planning and development phase of their Sustainable Living in Applecross project. Ultimately, this project is seeking to deliver 10 housing units and 2 local business units. The surveys have been identified by the architect as required as part of the planning process to satisfy the requirements of the Planning Authority and their consultees. And lastly, we have an application from Torridon District Community Association for improvement works on the Loch Torridon Centre. Members will be aware of this well-established and important community centre at the heart of the Torridon community. They are seeking to reduce their maintenance and operating costs by replacing external doors and windows, which are coming towards their end of life and a bit drafty, fitting solar panels and battery storage to reduce their operating costs, change to low energy LED lighting across the centre, and also to fit out a commercial kitchen to meet the needs of potential hire clients for events and weddings and such like. They're seeking £35,000 from CRF, which is 23% of the overall project costs, which has support from a number of funders like CARES and HIGH. Members will note I've put in the report that the Gairloch Museum Roundhouse project asked for more time to develop their application until a future committee. This is because they need to develop their project planning further and work on their application submission. So in summarising the report, members are asked today to consider these 5 applications with a total grant request of £186,794.32, with currently available funds standing at £470,808.09. If members approve these 5 applications, that will still leave £284,013.77 remaining for further projects to approve at future committees. I'll hand over to yourself, Chair.
Thanks. Any comments? Councillor Campbell?
No, just to approve and thank Mark for his dedicated work and to create sustainability within our Highland communities, which we all know that represent this area, and the people who put the applications, took the time and effort to put the applications forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Biz. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So from my point of view, I'm aware of the projects. They're all doing a great job in the community, and I think they've all met the criteria. And looking at sort of local place plans as well, they're fulfilling you know, the aims from that. Particularly excited about a couple of them, the housing in Applecross. And the Wester Loch U application is another quite exciting one. And Wester Ross Radio is just such a fantastic community resource, and they've actually got or they did have at one point just an amazing young person locally employed there, real local talent. So having looked at them all and read the report, I'm happy to approve them. And thanks for all your work, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would encourage, if any members want me to put them in touch with any of the projects, I want to hear any more about them, just please get in touch, because they're all doing great work.
Yeah. Can I just add very selfishly as well, I know it's over your part of the ward, but the Kyle toilets.
Oh, I
very
fully,
important. Yeah, delighted
I
to see
was going to
that.
come in
Yeah.
there last summer. The Kyle Trust had terrible problem with the toilets in the height of the tourist season, and it created a huge problem. So I was really delighted to see this on the programme today, that it's going to get sorted, and thank the Kyle Trust for all the work they put into for this to happen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think the timing of this is really important, actually, because if getting a grant approval now means that they should be able to replace that roof before the tourist season next year.
Yeah. Do you have any comments, Councillor Logue? You're happy to approve? All happy to approve? That's great. Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thanks
Mark.
very much. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So the next item should be Ross Bartlett with the invitation to pay, but I think, have we got a change in agenda, Lynn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Maeve Maguire is here and is able to take the short-term lets item now, if that suits you okay, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, are we happy to go with short-term lets? Slight change to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks, Maeve. We will hand over to yourself. Thank you. Oh, just maybe get your title. Sorry, you're Development Planning Officer. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm the Principal Planner in Development Plans team. So I work alongside Tim Stott and David Cowie in our work to progress the next local development plan for the Highlands.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Okay, so we'll hand over to you. Thanks.
That's fine, thank you. Yes, so a lot of the work that members may have already seen about the short-term let report that was brought to full council in September, that was work that myself and members of the Development Plans team have been heavily involved in preparing in collaboration with colleagues in licensing to get that kind of data and evidence available for members to hopefully make it clearer and easier to sort of make evidence-based decisions. So I've presented a Wester Ross and Strathpeffer and Lochalsh version of this evidence today and presented in the report. So just a very quick recap for those who are not aware, because some members I'm aware are on licensing committees and otherwise, but essentially a short-term let control area will mean that future conversions of housing to short-term lets will always require planning permission. That doesn't mean that this should be interpreted as a ban. It just means that they'll be required to apply for planning permission, and those planning applications will be considered in accordance with the determining policies. So those are policy 30E of MPF4 and the council's existing short-term let control policy. And there are some instances where those planning applications would be supported. So it doesn't control existing properties. It doesn't apply, therefore, retrospectively. So this bringing in a short-term let control area anywhere in the Highlands would not require existing short-term lets to apply for planning permission. They did not require planning permission at the time that change of use occurred. And as I said, it doesn't apply retrospectively. It also doesn't apply to second homes, to guest houses, to B&Bs, annexes or pods, because of course annexes and pods already require planning permission, because if you are building a new structure, you're required to apply for planning permission for that structure. So in a sense, they already require planning permission. So when we look at what a short-term let control area actually does, it will require that any new conversions of housing to short-term let will require planning permission. So the policy that is used in Ward 20 to determine whether those planning applications should be supported or refused are following the criteria that are shown. So in the instance where it's a long-term empty dwelling house, that is therefore seen as being brought back into use. So those types of short-term let applications are generally supported. Where it's a vacant unit above a commercial unit in a town or village centre, and also where it has no less than fewer bedrooms is one of the conditions as well. So again, I would stress that this won't apply retrospectively and it should not be interpreted as a ban. So I hope that is clear. So there is a statutory process of designating further short-term let control areas. We have to notify and consult. We have to submit this towards the Scottish ministers for their approval, and we then, having followed that process, have to provide a final publication of 28 days to notify the public that this will be coming into force before it takes effect. Members agreed in September that it would be for the area committees to take that first step to decide on whether to progress with the introduction of a short-term let control area covering all or part of the area, and then that E&I would take that decision to formally commence the process, which would trigger the formal consultation, and that E&I, having then taken into account that feedback from the consultation and the evidence, to decide whether to submit this to Scottish ministers, i.e. continue with that process, and then the final decision, once Scottish ministers review it, to come back to us and say you can proceed, would be then taken by E&I to do so. So where we are at the present point in this process is here. So November and December, all area committees in this cycle are considering a short-term let control area item. And as part of that, we're discussing what the evidence says about short-term lets in those particular areas. We intend to report to E&I in February, telling them which area committees have indicated they wish to consider the process and which areas have not. So the timeline for to bring a short-term let control area into force following this process would be anticipated to take between 12 to 18 months. This is the stage at which the area committee gets to input into this process. You'll see from that timeline presented that all other reports henceforth will go to E&I. So this is the point really at which the area committee gets to consider this. The public consultation will be triggered by E&I, and the feedback from that consultation will be brought to E&I. So it's important that members understand what this meeting and this item today is therefore achieving. So I'll look at the evidence presented so far. The Council's officers in development plans have been leading with our appointed consultant undertaking a housing need and demand assessment, which is a very robust and technical piece of analysis which is designed to be submitted to Scottish Government statisticians for us to evidence our housing need and demand over a 10 and actually a 20-year period. So this contains a lot of different pieces of work. We look at the Council's stock profile, we look at the social care sector and their unique needs for housing. We look at house sales transactions, we look at the private rented sector. So as part of what was being presented to members, the house sales transactions, which is from the Saisines data, looks at 5 years of sales. So we're talking 18,000 transactions. And what we've presented today is therefore what the distinct 10 different housing market areas of Highland look like and how those housing markets are performing. What you can see here is that the ward for Ward 5 does not neatly fit within one housing market area. The Lochalsh area is actually part of the Skye housing market area. So in order to just set that out quite clearly, that I would draw your attention to the Skye and Lochalsh and the Ross and Cromarty West, because all of Ross and Cromarty West falls within Ward 5, but the Lochalsh portion of your ward and your area falls within a distinctly separate housing market area. That said though, both of those housing market areas are very similar in terms of what the evidence actually says. So when we look at containment, if this isn't clear, when people are looking for a house to buy in their area, a strong or a high rate of containment tells me that a lot of the house sales that are purchased in an area are purchased by people who already live there. Their postcode is already within that area. And we see that some housing market areas of Highland have really high rates of containment, but Ross and Cromarty West and Skye and Lochalsh are not that. You can see here that 47% of house sales purchased in Ross and Cromarty West were purchased by people living in the Highland Council, and only 26% were actually purchased by people living in Ross and Cromarty West itself. And in Skye and Lochalsh as well, we're seeing lower numbers overall. What we do see is a really high proportion of sales purchased by people who live outside the Highland Council area. So those are elsewhere in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, and actually sometimes further afield than that as well. We also took away all the pods, the chalets, the potential non-conventional accommodation that is used as short-term lets, and we focused on the short-term lets that could conceivably be used as dwellings. And what we see here is that in the Ross and Cromarty West housing market area, 12% are actually showing up as licensed short-term lets on the licence register, which is double the Highland average. And in the Skye and Lochalsh area, which we have to caveat because it includes Skye, and we're seeing 18%. So Lochalsh is subject to some of that pressure as well from what we're seeing. So what we tend to see coming forward in this sales data is that the housing market areas with the lowest rates of containment have the highest proportion of short-term lets, and they also have the highest proportion of second homes as well. But I wouldn't want to dwell too much on those because they are not within the scope of what a short-term let control area could regulate. So when we look at how the housing market's performing, what does this actually mean in terms of affordability for local residents? What it basically means is that the market entry house price, which is about halfway down that table, for Ross and Cromarty West and for Skye and Lochalsh, both of those market entry house prices for those areas are higher than the Highland average. So the market entry house price is the initial house price to attract buyer interest to that sale onto the market. And what we tend to see in really overheated housing markets is that the average house price, which is what houses are actually selling for, is considerably higher than what the market entry house price is. This equates to around 71% of the local population cannot afford what houses are actually selling for in Ross and Cromarty West and Skye and Lochalsh, and that is presuming a 15% deposit with a 3 to 3.5 times income lending ratio, which is a standard industry metric for working out affordability. So the high prevalence of short-term lets that we're seeing coming through in our housing stock profile is correlating with pressure in the housing market, and that is flagging up in the indicators. The percentage of sales from Scotland, so outside the Highland, UK and elsewhere, do play a role here because the income affordability has that upward pressure on house prices. So in an instance where we're seeing quite a high proportion of people coming from outside that housing market area, that means that the median income of external locations, which could often be higher than in these areas themselves, is actually being used to push up, those prices. So this is potentially reflected in some of the community concerns that have been raised to members in the meeting today. When we look at the profile of short-term lets specifically, we can see that the majority of the short-term lets in this ward and in this area as a result are potential dwellings. So of the 1,027, 849 of them are potentially dwellings, and they have been converted to short-term lets without planning permission because there is no requirement for them to have planning permission at the present time. The unconventional accommodations, such as short-term lets, pods and chalets, do require permission because they're purpose-built tourism accommodation. When we look at new build completions to get a sense of whether this trend is likely to continue and whether new housing built in the area is actually being transferred to short-term let, we're seeing here that over the last 5 years, it varies by year, but we are seeing 11% of our new build houses in the area converted to short-term lets. They are applying for short-term let licenses and they're appearing on the short-term let license register within 5 years. Now, this 11% figure is put into context against Highlands, which is 5. So it's more than double what we would expect to see in other parts of Highland. The dominant types of property that are used as short-term lets are predominantly detached dwellings. We see that across the area itself. There are a small number of instances where the predominant type is unconventional accommodation, but those are very small in the grand scheme of things. You can see the majority are detached dwellings. When we look at what this means, though, as a percentage of potential dwellings that have been converted to short-term lets, we are looking at quite a number of areas within the Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh area, which exceed 10%, which exceed 15%. And these numbers on the scale bar in the bottom right corner, they correspond to the data itself. So anything between 0 and 5, so the dark green, those are Highland average and below. Everything that's kind of light green is above the average for Highland, but it is within a sort of normal threshold. But we would expect to see in any data set, you would expect a range. So anything above 11.7 is actually higher than what is considered statistically normal in this particular type of data. So anything yellow or above is seen as high. And this is obviously an issue that we're likely seeing in the west and into Lochalsh as well, into Shieldig and parts of Wester Ross, and even north of Ullapool into Achiltabui as well. When we look at the areas that are also changing the most, The areas that are green have seen the proportion of short-term lets decline. Orange are those that are increasing, but they are increasing slower than the Highland average, and red are the areas that are increasing faster than the Highland average. So there are some areas that you can see that are high and continuing to grow as a result, and I think shielding is particularly drawn out there, but there are other areas that are already high, but they are also continuing to grow. And some areas have been continuing to grow faster than the Highlands average for 2 consecutive years. We've also looked at registered local place plans within the Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh area. So there are currently 4 registered ones that they have completed the process in Gairloch, Garvan district in Lochalsh, and in Torridon and Kinlochew. Now, local place plans have a statutory role in the planning process. We are meant to consider those formal expressions of community intent and aspiration, and we're certainly meant to take that into consideration in the local development plan. So we've had a review of what they say in terms of short-term lets, and we've tried to go about this in quite a structured, systematic way, because some local place plans explicitly state they want a short-term let control area. They put that in black and white. Others mention less concrete concerns. So they do mention short-term lets, but not an explicit request for a short-term let control area. So what we've seen here is that in Gairloch, there is a strong link with housing. There is concerns about short-term lets in the Gairloch area. They've talked about licensing requirements, which are separate legislative remit, which are not concerned with planning related issues such as over-provision. They're suggesting that housing brought out of short-term lets should be in use as long-term rental accommodation. Garvan district does not make any explicit request for short-term let control, but they do mention that the tourism industry is a big sector within their local economy. Lochalsh does mention the need for visitor facilities, but does not again mention short-term lets explicitly. And Torridon and Kinlochew, though, mention that a key challenge in the area is to address the housing crisis, and that the area has a higher proportion of second homes, holiday homes, and also than the national or regional averages. And this seems to be pushing up prices beyond what the local housing economy can support. So the area place plan also highlights the impact of short-term lets and mentions the impact on property prices. So I would stress that relative to when this was written in the area place plan, the HNDA analysis that the team have led with our consultant would demonstrate that these statements are borne out by empirical evidence, very recent empirical evidence. There are also 2 further notified local place plans, which have not yet been fully registered. So we have reviewed them, but they don't have that same formal status. And both of them, in any case, make no explicit mention of short-term lets or tourist accommodation issues. So in that case, then, I've put item recommendations in the report for members to consider today that, on balance, the evidence at this time indicates that there is a justification for further consideration of a short-term let control area in the Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh area. I think compared to Highland as a whole and compared to other areas within Highland, the evidence in regards to housing availability and affordability would suggest that that would be justified, and that if we were to progress to the next stage and instruct a formal consultation, we would be able to put together an evidenced statement of reasons to the public to allow them to consider that information, which we think warrants further consideration. So there is undoubtedly strong tourist demand in the area, and there are a lot of tourists who come to stay in purpose-built tourism accommodation. And the economic impact that the tourism sector makes is substantial, but those same economic impacts can be realised by tourists coming to stay in pods and chalets and purpose-built holiday homes, which can be built through the usual planning process without requiring a loss of housing stock in the area to local people. So those are the recommendations I've put forward within the item. If members would like to come with me to any questions or debate the item, I'm happy to conclude.
Thanks, Maeve. Any questions or comments, Councillor Campbell?
I have to, in the Plockton area, the Plockton Trust have been canvassing for this for 2 years. And yesterday they sent me a letter endorsing it, that the Plough District Community Trust have been a long-standing advocate for designating Plough District as a short-term let control area. So I have to state that, because I said I would promise to them that I would do it. But I'm just wondering, a question. We're going out to consultation to the public, and consultation, in my past experience, has been getting opinion of the public in those areas. So what weight would the public opinion have on this happening in each area?
Well, we'd have to come up with a very clear statement of reasons so that the public aren't being asked this in a void. You know, we have to demonstrate why we're considering this. And if members need a good example, I would advise that Perth and Kinross have, as of the 22nd of October, commenced a consultation for Highland Perthshire to be considered as a short-term let control area. They've published a consultation with a dedicated questionnaire, but it follows on from a statement of reasons so that the public are clear why the council is considering this, and they can also see the map, the boundary that would actually come under that type of control if it were taken forward. They can enter their postcode and see if that is actually within the area itself. So these are the kinds of tools that any public consultation in Highland would want to be using as well to make it really clear. We also need to make it clear to the public that this does not apply retrospectively, and that existing short-term let operators, who may be the ones who have the most vocal resistance to this, that they're clear that they are not actually impacted and they would continue to operate. I think as long as we pitch those important points within our consultation, we've put ourselves in a better place to make sure that that feedback we get is informed. Now, to answer your direct question though about the weight that it has, in an ideal world, the public consultation feedback would tie in exactly with empirical evidence, and that really would be your kind of gold standard. And I agree with you, that doesn't always happen. There are some communities that want short-term let control areas, even though they don't have empirical evidence that justifies that it is a significant problem relative to other areas. We'll have to present a report to E&I at the end of that consultation. We'll present our evidence that was put forward to the public. We'll present a summary report of that consultation feedback, and we would like to break that down. You know, what did the business community say specifically? What did community groups say specifically? And being able to be quite careful in how that questionnaire is put together so that we're able to, at a later stage, work out who the various parties are so that members can make a balanced decision, you know, knowing what these different community groups may have to say about this. I suppose that's really all I can say, is to try and make it as clearly structured and organised as we can.
Another question I have is, if somebody is living in a community and they have died and the house goes on the market and we need a key worker for that area, like whether it be a nurse or a doctor or whatever, and we can't get one locally, and somebody from down south who we always welcome up to the Highlands is willing to take the post and willing to purchase that property. They don't need to apply for planning because they're not going to let the house. So is it all right for them to come and live in that house?
Yes, if someone wants to come and take out a rental agreement on a house, it doesn't fall under the definition of secondary letting, which is what can be regulated through a short-term let control area. So, and like I said, it wouldn't apply retrospectively. So even if, for example, they found in an instance where they needed very immediate rapid accommodation provision in the Wester Ross area, if all they could find was a short-term let at that time while they were seeking something more semi-permanent, the properties that are already short-term lets would not be impacted. They're not going to have to rescind licenses. You know, it doesn't work that way. So in a sense, the percentages that are being used as short-term lets, they could fall if people either rescind their licenses or more housing gets built to sort of keep up with the pace that are being lost to short-term lets, or the numbers could, well, I suppose with a short-term let control area, they may not rise any higher, because there would be a provision for us to say, is this an appropriate use, and looking at whether or not there is an argument for over provision to be taken into consideration in a planning stage. And that's something that cannot be considered by our colleagues in licensing, because it's not a licensing issue. I think that's caused a little bit of confusion and frustration with the public who are consulted on licensing matters for these types of developments. So I think there's an opportunity, I suppose, to set a clearer picture for everyone as to what exactly is required.
Thank you.
Councillor Logue.
Thank you, Chair. Just got a few questions. Firstly, about the process, and I do appreciate that the process was agreed by the full council. But if I'm reading the recommendations correctly, and you mentioned it in your introduction, this is the only opportunity that this committee has to input into that process. After this committee, all decisions are taken by E&I.
Yes.
So in the recommendations, it says, consider and agree that West Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh Area Committee therefore seeks to progress with the process of considering the introduction covering all or part of the West Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh area.
Yes.
So if we, for example, as Councillor Campbell alluded to, if we only wanted, just for example, Plockton to be covered, we would need to make that decision now because we have no further opportunity to input. Is that correct?
Certainly, if you wanted to, you could put an amendment. You could table an amendment telling us whether it is all or part. I've left that wording relatively open. The ward is a very big ward and it's a very diverse ward. Strathpeffer is quite a different area to Shieldig, for example. So, I mean, certainly if we look at the map again, I'm happy to kind of go back to it and we can see. But I mean, certainly from about the edge of between Conton and Garve out to the west, we're seeing areas that are either high or they are growing faster than the Highland average. And if we were to designate a boundary that's too tight, there is, given that this takes 12 to 18 months to come into force, you could end up, from what we saw in Badenoch and Strathspey, maybe just go back to the timetable so that you can see what happens. Sorry, this slide here. So this took about 12 to 18 months before once the short-term let control area comes into force, which is the very bottom, this is the point at which the planning applications will actually be required, not earlier than this. So if we were to cut the boundary very tight, we will likely see a growth in applications seeking to get that change of use in certificates of lawful use is what we will see come forward before it comes into force. And therefore, there is a risk there could be some displacement in that people will apply for short-term lets or start buying property to use potentially as short-term lets just outside the boundary that we set. So that would be my sort of importance of stressing that where we draw that line is actually quite important, because if we're seeing areas that are high in isolation without looking at the areas that are also seeing a lot of growth, we could end up missing a big part of the picture. So I hope that the slides presented give members a sense of where is growing and that would warrant further observation, as well as the areas that are already high.
Thank you for that. If it's okay, Chair, can I continue? Yes. Right. So from what you said, if we did, because the conversations that we've had about this in the past, and I don't want to speak for any other members, the sense I've gotten is that we wouldn't want to cover the whole ward. We would only want to cover parts of the ward. But obviously other members can speak to their own opinions. The other questions that I had, the kind of wording I thought was interesting. You say on balance the evidence at this time. Am I reading too much into that, or is the implication that it's a finely balanced decision? Like, what is there a benchmark that you're using in terms of to come to that conclusion?
I think to come to the word on balance, I'm really sort of looking at relative to Highland and other areas of the Highlands as a whole. You have higher proportions of short-term lets, and I mean potential dwellings used as short-term lets, than Badenoch and Strathspey, which already has a short-term let control area in force. So you also have a less contained housing market than they do. I mean, the indicators for what this means in terms of how your housing market is performing speak to a stronger evidence base than the short-term let control area that we already have. So I suppose I don't want to sound in any way alarmist, and I'm trying to use the term on balance to reflect that really it is taking that comparative approach. It's a very diverse authority. There are 10 distinct housing market areas. And certainly I think there's any short-term let control area, regardless of how strong the evidence is, it has to go through the same process. And all we would want to do as officers is make sure that the evidence case is as robust and that we're therefore confident in presenting that to the Scottish Government, but is also clearly communicated to the public as well, which is going to be very important at the next stage if E&I in February decide to commence that process with the formal consultation.
And just one more question, if that's okay. In terms of 12 to 18 months, and I suppose that would be progressing from when E&I makes a decision, which will not be until February, is that right?
Yes, we would report to them in February with which we would tell them which area committees in this November and December cycle have opted to continue the process.
So that would probably, well, possibly take us into the next council in terms of after the next elections. So my question is, what's the process for rescinding this if, for example, the next composition of this committee decides not to? Is there a process for it?
So if in February, there's the timetable I've shown is that we would prepare, if we were instructed by E&I in February, we'd prepare that statement of reasons and launch that consultation, indicatively in April and May. It has to run for a minimum period of 28 days. But Perth and Kinross are running theirs for 2 months, and I think that would be sort of seen as reasonable. If they decided, having reflected on the evidence and that consultation, not to consider it, then the next kind of yellow line down is to report that consultation and outcome to E&I and to seek their approval. They may not approve it at that stage, and it could be, that the switch could be turned off at that stage. And even after it's submitted to Scottish ministers who say you've got the green light to go ahead, E&I could even at that stage decide not to proceed. So there are further stages that would need to be followed in the process.
Any more questions, or is that you? Okay, so yeah, my comments and questions. First of all, it's something that probably in my heart of hearts, I knew what a big issue it was. Similar to Councillor Campbell, I've been approached by communities asking us to address this huge anger and distress in communities as they see the housing stock going. Your report is one of the most powerful reports I have ever read, I have to say, and it actually, I get quite choked up. Those are really powerful figures, and they just undermine what I think I knew anyway, but to have it there in percentages is really powerful, and we can't ignore it. We have to do something. You're right, Councillor Logue. I think the issue has always been because the ward is so diverse. Whether we do it over the whole area, which is the ward is an area, However, looking at the displacement and the growing factors that you've presented, Maeve, these are quite powerful. And if we were to ignore that now, then possibly we couldn't rectify that later. If we were to say we'll do part of the ward now, and then all of a sudden we realise actually that's massively impacted on the part that we haven't included, because knowing the geography, the Strathpeffer part of the ward, although it kind of sits in Ross, there is very much, it's the gateway to the west. It's where everybody comes and, you know, and they head off. So it does have that feeling of being the next best. If you can't be in Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and the area would be the next best place. And I can totally visualise what you were describing there. So my feeling is that it should be the whole area. I'm also quite heartened of what you've described as being really quite a robust process, and also getting that message out that this is not, you know, it's not a refusal for people to have a short-term let. It's just that certain considerations will be taken into account when going ahead. The other thing that I wanted to comment on, and I don't know if you can give us any more information on this, was the recent report that came from the Badenoch and Strathspey area, and also what was more powerful was the verbal reports from the local members who were saying that in the really relatively short period that has been implemented, they are seeing a drop in house prices to become more affordable, and also more properties coming onto the market. And that would be absolutely the reason for doing this. So I find that all really encouraging. So yeah, my only, I have had a question raised, so I'm going to ask it here. So it's, you know, I've asked it in the public domain, and that is from crofters, because crofters were given the opportunity by the Scottish Government to diversify with their crofts, and a lot of them have supplemented their income with that. So some of them are worried that this is kind of reneging on something that they were offered, should it come into place. So if you could comment on that, I'd be grateful. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to stress that the crofting legislation and the planning legislation has never really aligned very well, and that there needs to be a really clear, even before talking about short-term lets, there always needs to be a really clear understanding about where those two interact. The short-term let control area policy that's used in Ward 20 was written for Ward 20, and I think if we were to end up in a position where we have other short-term let control areas, we need to look at the policy and see, is this appropriate for wider application in other areas? And there might need to be some provision about crofting, for example, and the policy could be amended separately to the designation of a short-term let control area itself. So that's certainly a possibility. If the crofting application for a short-term let were to come in, well, if they were to apply for pods and chalets, which many crofters do, again, they already require planning permission. So again, this is one of those instances where the short-term let control area does not impact them at all. If they were to be converting sort of former structures like steadings or barns, those are long-term or derelict structures. Many of them wouldn't even be classed as long-term empty on any sort of council tax register. So that would be, again, an instance where the policy as it's currently written would actually support it, because it's a conversion of an empty structure or bringing it back into use. So the only instance where, if it were in a croft, it would cause a planning application to be required, which is potentially where it could be refused, is where they are changing a dwelling into the short-term let, but surely they would need that dwelling to comply with the requirements of being a resident crofter. So I suppose the answer to your question is the most crofts that are using short-term let accommodation would find that the type of short-term let accommodation they would propose would either comply with the policy or wouldn't actually require any interaction with the short-term let control area, because it would be a purpose-built piece of tourism accommodation in any event.
Thanks.
I hope that provides some
It does.
clarity.
Thank you. Thanks. Councillor Campbell?
It's just on Madam Chair, what you said about the clusters and the short-term lets. In some areas, particularly ours and Skye, our area, West of Ross and Skye, there's more crofts than there is in other areas of the Highland. So it was very pertinent that you said that, because I've gone through the process of when the government offered grants to people to diversify from agriculture. And as you know, clusters in agriculture have very small means to live on. So to be given that opportunity to earn extra income from a short-term let attached to the croft was very important to them. And also to the government of the day, because those people didn't go for handouts from the government. They were self-contained. They made their own money. And although today that I probably will agree for a blanket throughout all the areas, I must stress you don't cut off the hand that feeds you. And in our area, tourism is the biggest thing there is for employment in our area. So although I'm agreeing for that, I'm also a strong canvasser for the tourist industry. So.
Thanks for that. Do you want to comment on that, Maeve, or are you?
No, I think that's a fair point, and obviously
Yeah.
the tourism industry is a huge contributor to the economy, and the term short-term let control area, I've tried to sort of demonstrate the exact instances where that would come into force, where it relates to conversions. But there are, of course, a lot of different types of tourism accommodation, and we have such a booming tourism industry that tourists will use many different kinds of tourism accommodation, including purpose-built short-term lets. And those purpose-built short-term lets already require permission. So it certainly hasn't dampened the industry by requiring planning permission for pods and chalets and things. We see those applications a lot in planning, and they're very high quality in a lot of instances, and they're very highly used. So we certainly would like to support the industry and to also accommodate the growth of the tourism industry in a way that doesn't involve the loss of something, and in this case housing, including housing that would be needed for workers who work for the tourism industry. So we kind of need to provide, the link between housing here is really important. We do need to make sure that housing stock, which in an area is characterized by no volume house builders who will replace housing stock that is converted, we need to make sure that the existing housing stock is considered in balance when we're looking at whether or not we can justify a short-term let control area.
Okay. Councillor Campbell?
I would have caution in everybody being directed into pods. Personally, I think they're dreadful things. I couldn't even swing a cat in them. So how do we expect our tourists who have been used to wonderful accommodation at home to come see our beautiful Highlands and pushed into a pod? Surely they've got the privilege of a guest house hotel or to stay in the Highlands.
Yeah, sorry, I apologise. I said pods for brevity, but what I mean is unconventional accommodation. So that includes purpose-built holiday homes who, a planning consent was sought to build what looks like a dwelling, but is actually a purpose-built holiday home. So that is actually classed as non-conventional accommodation as well, because it was not a conversion of a property that was registered as a house. So sorry, I don't mean pods in isolation. I mean there are plenty of purpose-built tourism accommodations available for tourists, and as well you've mentioned guest houses and hotels, so serviced accommodation as well. We want to support a tourism industry that can be allowed to grow without involving that loss of housing supply.
I'm finished.
So I have one final question. It's going back to something you said earlier. don't know, the kind of scheme of delegation or the protocol around how these planning decisions are made, they are individual to each area. Is that correct? Or is there going to be a blanket one for all of Highland?
So at the moment, all area committees are considering a short-term let control area in November and December. So a report will be brought to every one of them and has been sent to the clerks of other area committees to ask, reflecting on the evidence that's been undertaken so far relative to their specific area, what on balance does that evidence suggest? In some areas, it does not suggest that a short-term let area would be as strongly evidenced as in other locations. And in some areas, the evidence would suggest that that would be warranted. So in this case, my item recommendations are that this is considered for further progression. So just to go back to what you were saying about the policy itself, the existing policy that we use to determine planning applications was written at the time that the short-term let control area was being progressed for Ward 20. So it was written knowing that that was the boundary that it would be likely applied within if the process were to go to completion. Now, we could, through a separate process to the designation of the short-term let control area, we could look at whether that policy is appropriate for Ward 5 and whether or not there was the particular criteria that are shown on your screen fully reflect the types of instances that are appropriate or not appropriate to support any conversions to short-term lets. But at the present time, this policy applies to Ward 20.
Thanks. Any more questions? So in that case, I'm just going to read through the recommendations that we're going to agree to just for clarity. So to consider and note the evidence presented demonstrating the degree of prevalence of short-term lets within Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh, and note that this evidence demonstrates that the housing market within parts of Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh is subject to significant pressure exacerbated by high rates of potential dwellings being converted to short-term lets. To note that the designation of any new short-term let control area will have no retrospective impact on existing short-term lets where no material change of use has occurred at the time of establishment, and will therefore only require planning permission from new short-term lets established after a short-term lets control area comes into force. We should note that the Economy and Infrastructure Committee formally commenced the process of introducing a short-term lets control area. This will initiate a process of further evidence gathering and public consultation with communities. So we're asked to consider and agree that the Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh Area Committee therefore seeks to progress with the process of considering the introduction of a short-term lets control area covering all or part of Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh, and in doing so agree that progressing with consideration enables communities within the area to participate in that consultation at the appropriate stage. So I would just like to note that I support this, and I support it for the whole of the area, the whole of the area of Wester Ross, Strathpeffer and Lochalsh. Are we agreed, members?
Of course, it's cleaner that way.
Agreed, Councillor Logue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you like me to table a amendment to reflect that it's for all of the wards? Or would you like to keep the wording as it is?
So do we have to have an amendment if it's all of the, I think we've agreed, I think looking at your stats and the possibility of displacement and the growing numbers in the eastern part of the ward, I think it should be all. Councillor Logue?
I mean, I would assume that Ian and I would take notice of the conversations that we've been having. But I mean, for flexibility, in case they decide to do some, I mean, I would just keep the wording as it is, but that is my opinion.
Okay.
Okay.
I would go with that as well, Patrick.
Yeah, I'll agree as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Maeve, for your time and for taking all our questions.
Thank you.
For your excellent report that I've notified a few people who have asked that it is available online in the public domain under the minutes, because it is quite powerful reading for our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we have Ross Bartlett, who is we're back to item 6, which is an update on the invitation to pay income. Ross, thanks for waiting patiently. We'll hand over to you.
Okay. That's okay. That's what I get for not being available when my item comes up. Unfortunately, I was in another committee meeting. So this paper was formally just a bulletin item to note the income. So it's just a quick item, hopefully for you, to note the income. Kind of running through the paper, the main points are in 5.2, which is the income, the net income that's been allocated to the area committee as earmarked funds. So the total for your area is 24,417.31. Has been allocated, and I've provided the breakdown in the report for each car park, as in line with policy. So that's the kind of the meat of it. So if members have any questions, I'll happily answer them.
Any questions, members? Councillor Campbell. I think you're on mute.
When councillors approach us and want their funding, which we agreed to give 50% to of this takings, they have to get a form. They have to consider a plan within the community of what they want the money for, and get a form to fill out to send to the council. Is it you that deals with that, Ross?
No, I'm not. Well, after the money is awarded to the area, I'm not involved anymore. I think it's managed by
Jane Young.
Yeah. So your community, I forget the job title, is community support officer now, is it?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
So that's managed through them.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's the same application, or it's a very similar application form as the community, as the ward discretionary fund. Yeah, and we've seen quite a few applications coming in over the years, so it's quite exciting seeing that money come back into the communities. Any more questions? So, well, thanks for the information. And we're just invited to note the earmarked funds for this committee, and there is a breakdown in the paper of which car parks they've been raised at, so we can find that out for the local communities. But the total amount is 24,417.31. So happy to note that, members.
Happy to note.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ross. That was short and sweet.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so item 8 on the agenda is just to note the following applications that have come into the discretionary fund between the 1st of June and the 30th of September, and that is to the Arctic Convoy Museum space. That was 2,693 fair share in Highland. Are we happy to note that?
Noted.
Thank you. And finally, just item to note the minutes of the previous meeting, which were approved by the council on the 18th of September. Are we happy to note these as well?
Noted.
Noted. Okay, thanks, members. That brings our meeting to a close. Thanks to all the officers that supported, and wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.